you're familiar with cannabis, right? I mean,
Right.
THC and CBD, they're the big names.
Yeah, absolutely.
But imagine there's like a whole team of unsung heroes inside that plant, quietly shaping its effects, maybe in ways you don't even expect.
That's a great way to put it. And today, yeah, we're doing a deep dive into one of those groups, a really fascinating and frankly often overlooked group of compounds in cannabis, the flavonoids.
Flavonoids. Okay, it almost sounds like something you'd find in, I don't know, a health food aisle.
And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. In a way, yeah. These are chemicals that plants make. They're not directly for growth, but for other crucial tasks.
Like what kind of tasks?
Think of them as the plant's multi-tool. Chemically, they're built around this core structure, two aromatic rings linked by a sort of three-carbon bridge.
Okay, a multi-tool. So what are they doing for the plant itself?
Well, they're vital, really vital. They give flowers and leaves their colors, you know.
Ah, the pigments.
Right. And they act like a natural sunscreen for the plant, protecting against UV damage. Plus, they're a key part of its defense system against pests and diseases.
Okay, so they're definitely useful for the plant, but why should we care? Especially, in the context of medical cannabis.
That's the crucial question.
Well, this deep dive is super relevant for doctors and patients because these flavonoids, they could be a really important piece of the puzzle for the entourage effect.
Exactly. That whole idea that all the compounds in cannabis work together.
Yeah, creating an effect that's more than just, like, the sum of its parts.
Precisely. Flavonoids aren't just hanging around. They potentially influence how cannabinoids, like THC and CBD, interact with our systems. Some might even have their own distinct therapeutic benefits.
So you look into this. What sources are we using?
We've got a comprehensive report here, really digging into the key flavonoids found in cannabis.
Okay, great. So our mission today is pretty clear then. Let's really get a handle on what these flavonoids are, why knowing about them actually matters, identify the common ones in cannabis.
Figure out what they might do, and importantly, what evidence backs that up.
Right, the evidence bit is key. And then ultimately, how could this knowledge help someone, maybe a patient or a doctor, make better choices about cannabis strains?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let's unpack this. What exactly are flavonoids, structurally speaking? You mentioned the rings.
Yeah, so at their core, it's that C6, C3, C6 structure. But what's really fascinating is the sheer variety you get from that basic template.
How so?
Well, there are different subclasses you hear names, like flavones, flavanols, flavanones. Each has slight variations in that structure.
Okay.
And then they can have different things attached to them, like hydroxyl groups or sometimes sugar molecules. These little modifications give each flavonoid its own unique personality and potential effects.
So it's like a basic Lego brick, but you can stick all sorts of different bits onto it to make different models.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. And these aren't some weird, obscure chemicals. They're everywhere in the plant kingdom, especially in things we eat.
Right, like fruits and vegetables.
Exactly. The bright colors in berries, the sharp taste of citrus peel, even things in herbs. A lot of the health benefits we talk about with those foods, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory stuff, that often comes down to their flavonoid content.
We hear about antioxidants all the time.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to cannabis specifically. How much of the plant, weight-wise, are we talking about? Are they major players or just trace amounts?
They're definitely significant, even if cannabinoids and terpenes get more headlines. Flavonoids can make up potentially up to around 2.5% of the dry weight of the plant material.
2.5%. That sounds like quite a bit, actually.
It can be, yeah, but it varies a lot. Depends on the strain, the growing conditions, which part of the plant you test.
Oh, interesting. So different parts have different amounts.
Yes. The flowers or buds, which people usually focus on, tend to have a lower concentration, maybe around 0.1% by dry weight. But the leaves can actually have quite a bit more, sometimes in the range of 0.3% to 0.4%.
Huh. So maybe there's value in the leaves we often discard.
That's something researchers are definitely looking into. We know of at least 20 different flavonoids identified in cannabis so far. The most common types seem to be flavones and flavanols, and often they exist as glycosides.
Glycosides, what does that mean practically?
It just means they have a sugar molecule attached. This can change how the flavonoid behaves in the plant and potentially how our body absorbs or uses it if we consume it.
Okay, so what are some of the specific names we should know? The main flavonoid players in cannabis.
Okay, so in the flavone group, you'll often see apigenin and luteolin mentioned.
Apigenin, luteolin, got it.
Then there are these related ones called C-glycosides. That just means the sugar is attached in a slightly different, more stable way. Examples there are orientin, vitexin, and isovitexin. And maybe cressin too, though it seems less common.
Orientin, vitexin, isovitexin.
Okay.
And the other group, flavanols.
Right, the flavanols. The main ones there are quercetin and camphorol. These are quite prominent in cannabis, but also found in lots of other foods.
Quercetin and camphorol. I think I've heard of those before, maybe in relation to onions or apples.
Very likely, yeah. They're widespread. But then cannabis has its own special class, too.
Oh, what's that?
There's a unique group called prenolated flavones. The best-known ones are canflavins A, B, and C.
Canflavins.
Yeah, these are pretty much unique to cannabis. You don't really find them elsewhere, and they've generated a lot of buzz because they seem quite potent.
Okay, canflavins. We definitely need to circle back to those, but maybe first, why should doctors and patients really be paying attention to all these different names? It adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It does. That's a fair point. But understanding flavonoids could really help fine-tune how medical cannabis is used. The big reason, like we touched on, is the entourage effect.
Right.
Flavonoids are thought to be major contributors. They can interact with cannabinoids in various ways. For example, some might inhibit certain liver enzymes, these things called cytochrome P450 enzymes.
Okay, cytochrome P450, slow down. What does inhibiting those enzymes actually do?
Well, think of your liver as having specific tools, enzymes, to break down compounds, including THC.
Right, metabolism.
Exactly. If flavonoids slow down some of those specific enzyme tools, it could mean THC gets broken down more slowly.
Ah, so potentially the effects of THC could last longer or maybe feel a bit stronger just because its breakdown is slowed.
That's the theory, yes. And it's not just about metabolism. When cannabis is smoked or vaped, many flavonoids seem to survive the heat and remain active.
Really? Even when heated?
Some do, yeah. And they can act as antioxidants right there in the lungs, which might help counteract some of the oxidative stress from inhaling smoke or vapor. Plus, their anti-inflammatory properties could be beneficial locally, too. Some research even hints they might protect against certain harmful byproducts generated during combustion.
That's actually quite reassuring, potentially.
It is. And then stepping back, these flavonoids have their own wide range of potential biological activities. So when cannabis is being used for, say, pain or anxiety or maybe neurodegenerative conditions, these flavonoids could be contributing to the therapeutic effects through their own mechanisms, separate from or working alongside the cannabinoids. They might be hitting targets that THC or CBD don't.
Wow. So it really is a team effort, not just the star players doing all the work. Okay, so let's name the key team members again. What are the most common flavonoids we're likely to find?
Based on the research, those canflavins A and B really stand out because they're so unique to cannabis. Remember, they were first ID'd back in the 80s.
Okay, canflavins A and B.
Then you've got the more common flavones, apigenin and luteolin, and the main flavonols, quercetin and camphorol. But remember, those last two are the ones you also get from eating lots of fruits and veggies.
Right, so eating well gives you some of the same compounds.
In some cases, yes. We also see orientin, vitexin, and isovitexin, those C-glycosides of luteolin and apigenin we mentioned.
And you said those are in passion flower, too.
That's right, which is interesting given passion flower's reputation for calming effects.
Definitely interesting. Any others?
Well, there's canflavin C, the newer one, less studied, possibly a modified canflavin A, and cresin seems to pop up as a minor component, sometimes in the plant, sometimes identified in the smoke, condensate.
Okay, quite a list. We've met the main players. Now, the really big question, what can these things actually do in the body? And crucially, what's the evidence? Let's start with those unique ones, canflavin A. You said potent.
Yeah, canflavin A has really grabbed attention mainly for its anti-inflammatory action. In lab studies, just looking at cells in a dish, it was shown to inhibit the release of prostaglandin E2, that's a key inflammation signal.
Okay.
And it did so with something like 30 times the potency of aspirin on a weight-for-weight basis in those specific tests.
30 times aspirin. Wow. That sounds incredibly strong. How does it work?
It seems to hit key enzymes in the body's inflammation pathways, specifically COX cyclooxygenase and also 5-LOX, which is 5-lipoxygenase.
COX and 5-LOX.
Right. Many common anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin or ibuprofen mainly target COX. By hitting both COX and 5-LOX, canflavin A might offer a broader approach to tackling inflammation. And interestingly, it doesn't seem to directly mess with the body's own endocannabinoid system.
So it's attacking inflammation from different angles,
Yeah.
potentially. But what about studies in actual people? Does that 30x potency translate?
Ah, well, that's where we need more data. There haven't been clinical trials testing isolated canflavin A in humans yet.
Oh.
Most of the promising anti-inflammatory and even some pain-relieving effects we've seen are from cell studies or animal models. Like in rodents, extracts containing canflavins showed reduced swelling and pain responses.
So in animals, it looks good.
Yes, in humans, the evidence is more indirect. We know whole cannabis extracts, which contain canflavins plus everything else, can have anti-inflammatory effects. But isolating canflavin A's specific contribution in humans is tricky. A big step forward, though, scientists figured out the genes to make it in yeast back in 2019. That should make studying it much easier.
Okay, so very promising, but still early days for human trials. What about its sibling, canflavin B?
Canflavin B, similar structure, also mostly unique to cannabis. It's also reported to be anti-inflammatory, though maybe studied a little less than A. Some early work suggested it could inhibit both prostaglandins and leukotrienes, another set of inflammatory molecules, and some reports suggested it might even be more potent than aspirin in certain lab models.
More potent again, but same story with human studies.
Pretty much, yeah. No human trials looking at isolated canflavin B because they usually occur together in the plant. Any effects you see from a cannabis extract probably involve both A and B plus other things. So it likely contributes to the overall anti-inflammatory picture of cannabis, but we can't point to specific human data on its effects on, say, pain or anxiety by itself.
Right, and canflavin C, the mysterious one.
Canflavin C is the newest, the least understood. It's another pre-enlated flavone, possibly a modified, maybe glucosylated version of canflavin A. It's presumed to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects based on its structure. One lab report noted antioxidant activity, but again, zero human studies specifically on C.
Okay, so the canflavins, potential inflammation fighters, but need that human research. Let's switch gears to apigenin. You mentioned it's in chamomile, the calming tea.
Exactly. Epigenin is a very common flavone found in chamomile, parsley, celery, lots of places. A key mechanism seems to be its ability to bind to benzodiazepine sites on GABA receptors in the brain.
GABA, that's the brain's main chill-out neurotransmitter, right?
That's the one. So by tickling those benzodiazepine sites, apigenin can produce a mild, calming, anxiolytic effect. It's likely a big part of why chamomile tea feels relaxing. It also does other things, interacts with estrogen receptors, acts as an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory.
Has this been tested in humans? Like the chamomile connection?
Yes, there are some decent human studies using chamomile extract, which is naturally rich in apigenin.
Oh, cool. What did they find?
Well, one study on people with generalized anxiety disorder found chamomile extract significantly reduced anxiety symptoms compared to a placebo. Another trial in older adults with sleep difficulties showed chamomile improved their sleep quality. And there was a small pilot study suggesting it might help with anxiety and depression in diabetics alongside their usual treatments.
So that calming cup of tea really does have something going on, likely thanks to apigenin. What about its role in cannabis then?
Well, apigenin is found in cannabis, but usually in lower concentrations than you'd get in a potent chamomile extract.
Ah, okay.
So any direct calming or sleep effects from apigenin in cannabis are probably going to be more subtle, but it could definitely contribute to the overall relaxing vibe of certain strains, especially those people use for anxiety or winding down. It might also work synergistically with other calming compounds like CBD.
Makes sense. Okay, how about luteolin, also in celery, you said?
Yes, luteolin, another flavone, structurally similar to apigenin. Its main reputation is for being strongly anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective. It seems particularly good at calming down certain immune cells, like mastocells and microglia, which drive inflammation, including in the brain. It's also a solid antioxidant.
Neuroprotective.
Yeah.
Does it have calming effects like apigenin?
Not directly in the same way. It doesn't seem to bind strongly to those GABA benzodiazepine sites, but by reducing inflammation and oxidative stress in the nervous system, it might have indirect benefits for things like anxiety or cognitive function over the longer term.
Okay, any human studies on luteolin?
A few interesting, though preliminary ones. A small pilot study gave a supplement containing luteolin to children with autism spectrum disorder and saw some reported improvements in behavior, possibly linked to reducing neuroinflammation. Also, large population studies suggest that people whose diets are higher in luteolin and related flavonoids tend to show slower cognitive decline as they get older. And there are some small trials looking at luteolin combined with PEA palmitoyl lefenolamide for nerve pain, showing some promise.
So luteolin sounds more like a background supporter for brain health and fighting inflammation, rather than giving an immediate calming hit.
That seems to be the general picture, yes. In cannabis, it likely adds to the overall anti-inflammatory and potentially neuroprotective profile, but its specific noticeable effects might be less obvious than, say, THC or CBD.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move to the flavanols, camphorol, and quercetin, found in berries, kale, onions, common stuff. What's their story?
Camphorol is another multitasker, potent antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. It inhibits things like COX2 and NF-kappa. There's also preclinical evidence suggesting it might be neuroprotective, possibly helping cells survive stress, and even showing some anti-anxiety and antidepressant-like effects in animal models.
Animal models again. What about people?
Well, similar to luteolin, large observational studies link higher dietary intake of camphorol to a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and slower cognitive decline with age. It's also been part of flavonoid mixtures used in studies that showed benefits for people with rheumatoid arthritis.
So another potential brain health ally and inflammation fighter?
Seems that way. And quercetin, which can be present in pretty high amounts in some cannabis strains, is another real powerhouse.
Okay.
It's a very strong antioxidant, profoundly anti-inflammatory through multiple pathways. There's evidence it might have analgesic or pain-relieving effects, possibly by affecting ion channels. Some studies suggest anti-anxiety or antidepressant activity too, maybe mild MAO inhibition or GABA interactions at higher doses, and definitely neuroprotective potential, like reducing amyloid buildup in lab models.
Quercetin sounds like it does almost everything. Human studies.
Yes, quite a few. Quercetin supplements have been shown to reduce pain and inflammation markers in people with rheumatoid arthritis. Another study found it reduced anxiety scores in people with type 2 diabetes. And again, those large dietary studies link higher quercetin intake to slower cognitive decline. Interestingly, one trial found it didn't really improve sleep quality, though.
Okay, so camphorol and quercetin, strong anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, potential neuroprotective effects, with some human data backing parts of that up. Now, what about those C-glycosides you mentioned? Orientin, Vitexin, isovitexin, the passion flower ones.
Right. They likely contribute significantly to passion flower's known calming and anxiolytic effects. Orientin is derived from luteolin, so it shares strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Human studies using passion flower extract, which contains orientin, have shown it can reduce anxiety. One study even found it comparable to a low dose of oxazimam for generalized anxiety disorder. It might also modestly improve sleep quality.
Comparable to a benzo. Wow. Okay, and Vitexin and isovitexin?
Those two are derived from apigenin. Again, human studies on passion flower, which has plenty of these, show benefits for anxiety and sleep. Vitexin itself has shown antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, even potential cardioprotective effects in animal studies. Isovitexin also looks promising for antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and maybe even cognitive enhancing effects in animals.
So finding these in cannabis,
Yeah.
it might suggest those strains could lean towards being more calming or anxiety reducing.
That's a reasonable hypothesis, yes. While the concentrations might be lower than in a dedicated passion flower supplement, their presence could absolutely contribute synergistically to an overall calming profile in certain cannabis strains.
Okay, one more, Crayson. Bee propolis, maybe cannabis smoke, calming effects in animals?
That's right. Chrysin binds to those GABA benzodiazepine sites, similar to apigenin, and shows anxiolytic effects in animal models. Human data is more limited, partly because it's not absorbed very well when you eat it.
Bioavailability issues.
Exactly, but what's intriguing in the cannabis context is its potential presence in smoke. If inhaled, it might bypass some of those gut absorption problems. So even small amounts, if inhaled, could potentially contribute to the relaxing or anxiety-reducing effects some people feel from smoking or vaping certain strains.
Fascinating. It really does paint a much richer picture of the plant beyond just THC and CBD levels. So the big practical question: how can patients or doctors advising them actually use this flavonoid knowledge right now to make smarter choices about strains?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because right now, if you look at product labels,
It's all THC and CBD percentages, mostly. Maybe some terpenes now.
exactly, terpenes are getting there. Flavonoids, not so much, not routinely anyway. But if and when we start getting more detailed flavonoid profiles on products, it could be a game changer for tailoring cannabis therapy.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, well, say someone is primarily seeking relief from anxiety. Based on what we just discussed, they might look for strains potentially higher in apigenin or those passion flower related ones like orientin, vitexin, isovitexin, or if they're inhaling, maybe cresin plays a role.
Right. And for inflammation or pain?
For pain and inflammation, maybe you'd lean towards strains suspected to be richer in those unique canflavins A and B, or those powerhouses quercetin and camphorol.
But that relies on actually knowing the flavonoid content, which we usually don't.
Precisely, that's the current limitation. Right now, a lot of strain selection based on the entourage effect is still driven by anecdotal reports, user reviews, and maybe some knowledge of the parent genetics or terpene profile. But the goal is to get to a place where comprehensive lab testing, including flavonoids, is standard.
So patients and doctors can make more informed, data-backed decisions.
Exactly. In the meantime, what people can do is keep detailed track of which specific strains or products work best for their symptoms. Note the reported lineage, the terpene profile, if available, and maybe cross-reference that with emerging research about which flavonoids tend to be associated with certain effects or genetic families.
So become a bit of a cannabis detective for your own condition.
Kind of, yeah. And always remember, it's likely the complex interplay, the synergy between cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoid that creates the overall therapeutic effect. It's the whole orchestra, not just the first violin.
That makes sense. And looking ahead.
Well, the really exciting prospect is breeding. We could potentially see cannabis strains being intentionally bred for specific high levels of certain flavonoids to target particular conditions, much like we've seen with CBD. The research is definitely moving in that direction. Understanding these flavonoids is a critical piece for unlocking truly personalized medical
This
cannabis.
has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up the key points, flavonoids are these diverse, important compounds in cannabis, not just colorful extras.
Right. They have their own potential therapeutic actions, especially anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, and they definitely contribute to that entourage effect.
And the common ones to be aware of include those unique canflavins, then apigenin, luteolin, quercetin, camphorol, and those passion flower C glycosides, each with different potential benefits, though the human evidence specifically from cannabis is still developing for many.
That sums it up well. And for you, the listener, hopefully this gives you a deeper appreciation for the sheer chemical complexity of cannabis and its potential for more tailored medicine down the line.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on. As the science evolves, could flavonoid profiling become just as crucial, just as standard, as THC and CBD percentages when recommending medical cannabis? Could we get to a point where we're selecting strains based on a full symphony of compounds for truly targeted results?
It's a very real possibility.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.